Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, The Silent Threat, Guarding Utility Infrastructure from Avian Intrusion. Today's discussion panel will be led by Jason Wilbert. He's the president of Bird Buffer, and Tom McElrath, who's the VP of Sales for Bird Buffer. Today, throughout the presentation, we encourage you to ask any question that you might have through the chat feature that's over on the right-hand side of your screen. Our moderators will be answering them throughout the event, but if for some reason we don't get to your question, please know that we will follow up with you directly following the live session. And know we're recording this event too, so we'll be sending that out after as well. It's our hope that you learn a little bit more about the options available to you for protecting your substations or other locations from birds today through our educational conversation together. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand the floor over to Jason.
Thank you, Jessica. Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, depending on where you are. Thank you for joining us. Tom and I are looking forward to sharing some what we think will be useful information with you based on some of our experiences helping with electrical utilities as they deal with the challenges of bird intrusions and bird mess and damages that large numbers of birds can do to high value infrastructure. As Jessica said, we will be your presenters. I'm going to cover the first half of our presentation, and then I'll turn it over to Tom, who will talk in detail about a case study that we worked on with PG&E on a particularly challenging problem at one of their sites in California. To get us started, we here at Bird Buffer recently did a survey with 100 respondents that are responsible for utility substations and related infrastructure. And we asked a series of questions, and some of the responses were, I think, quite insightful. It's very clear that birds love to be around substations. They provide warmth when it's cold. They provide nice roosting locations at height, which birds prefer to be at in order to avoid predators. And unfortunately, the more the birds come into an area, the more it attracts more birds to join. And so 73% of substations in our survey were experiencing some sort of bird pressure at some point throughout the year, which signifies that this is an important problem. It's no surprise, but substation uptime is of critical importance. Anytime we lose electrical power in our homes or in our places of employ, that can be a challenge. And it's certainly a challenge for the people responsible for making sure that power goes undisrupted. Of course, weather explains a significant portion of power disruptions, but wildlife is also highly significant to creating power outages. And 50% of wildlife power outages are caused by birds. And the third main cause is equipment failures, but obviously we're here to talk about the bird impact. There's really some staggering facts as we look at the broader challenge for a utility. When there is a power disruption or a power outage or equipment damage at a substation, it's going to most likely be at least a $10,000 problem to solve, and it could be upwards of $1 million to solve, depending on the type of equipment, the location of the substation, and various other challenges to get service restored to their customers. For wildlife and for birds in particular, which is 50% of the wildlife problem, it's estimated that birds do about $10 billion of damage in the utility industry globally every year. So a substantial challenge to be dealt with, to be sure. Well, why are birds a problem? Well, they obviously can make a mess with their droppings. It's amazing the ratio of droppings to the size of the birds that can be created. And when you have thousands of birds on a particular site, the mess becomes almost unbelievable. And they also nest and bring other materials into the area to build those nests. The problem with the droppings is not just that they're unpleasant, but they carry numerous potential diseases that can be a health issue for workers, facilities and maintenance in particular. And unfortunately, they also contribute to other wildlife issues because bird eggs and birds themselves can be viewed as food by other predators and attract more challenges to the site. Outages are often caused by capacitor bank failures, which can be created when you see electrical shorts in equipment in critical parts of the substation. And obviously this requires, even if the power isn't shut down, you might have to shut down the power to do the repair. Droppings are conductive, and the interesting thing in the survey was that we asked the question, do you believe that birds contribute to the risks to wildfires, which obviously in North America has become a much bigger concern as of late with climate change and other drivers. And 70% of organizations believe that reducing bird challenges within their substations can reduce the risk to wildfire. The other thing we learned is that 82% of those respondents who are responsible for electrical utility substations indicated that they have invested in bird control solutions, which isn't surprising given the data that we've pulled together. There are a range of technologies and solutions that can be brought to bear to try to reduce or eliminate bird intrusions, bird pressure, bird populations around critical infrastructure. And those are audible deterrents, exclusionary deterrents, so ways to just prevent the birds from actually gaining access to the location, visual deterrents like predator, molded plastic predators, or light, or just stuff that provides unpredictable movement. Lasers has become a technology that in recent years has been deployed. And then finally, botanicals. And we wanted to spend a bit more time on the botanical solution because I think it's the least well understood of the countermeasures that can be taken to address bird issues, and it's actually one of the most effective. Let me talk a little bit about the pros and cons of each of these technologies, and be very transparent up front that there is no one size fits all silver bullet for dealing with bird issues in all circumstances. It's highly contextual in terms of which technologies are going to provide the best solution in a given situation. Each of these technologies has its place, and each of these technologies has places where they really shouldn't be deployed because they're not going to be effective. In terms of audible deterrents, these are things like electronic mimicking of predator noises, or ultrasonic noise waves, which tend to disturb and cause birds to leave an area, or cannons, just very loud noises. The advantages for audible is that certain noises, in particular predator sounds, are demonstrated to scare birds away. That's very clear. I think some of the considerations are it can be very bird species dependent. So you might have a solution that works very well for ravens, but doesn't work on other types of birds like starlings. Birds easily habituate to audible deterrents. Birds are incredibly smart, and they once they determine that noise or that scare tactic actually doesn't come with any inherent danger, they can learn to ignore it. The range of efficacy can be limited because obviously the birds have to be able to hear the noise in order to be deterred by it. You can also, depending on the location of the noise device, annoy your neighbors because it annoys the birds, but it'll also annoy humans. And it may require human involvement to trigger if it's something like a gun or a cannon or something that makes a loud noise when the birds are present. Another approach is exclusionary techniques. This would include netting, fencing, spikes, optical gels, which birds don't want to have to walk around, or other covers, shields, or jackets, which are often used in utility applications. The advantage is that these can be highly effective in a relatively confined space because if deployed properly, you're going to literally exclude the birds from gaining access to that infrastructure. I think some considerations, certain exclusionary tactics can be overcome by smaller birds. Depending on the location and scope, they may be prohibitively expensive to install. So if you think about trying to net off a substation as an example, it's really not a practical solution. Depending on the location, if it's on a building that has some fine architecture and people are worried about aesthetics, they may not want to see netting or spikes around the building. Birds may be harmed in these techniques. You can see the picture on the left here where spikes were used, and because it was a small enough bird, it was able to nest in the spikes. That's maybe okay for the bird, but I've also seen pictures of birds that have been impaled by spikes or caught in nets, which is not the most humane approach. Facilities and maintenance and operations can be problematic. If you net off the upper areas of a building to keep the birds away from the rafters, that can be great. But if you have to get into the rafters in order to maintain or service HVAC equipment or some other mechanical equipment, you've just made that job significantly harder. And then just the installation of these solutions, again, birds tend to prefer to be at heights. And when you have to install these solutions at height, you need to be thoughtful about the safety of the workers that are doing that work. Visual deterrents, including molded predators, light reflectors. Optical gel does have an optical element to it as well that birds tend to want to avoid. The advantages here can be somewhat effective in certain applications. I would say with relatively low bird pressure and inexpensive relative to other technologies. These technologies tend to be fairly inexpensive and easier to deploy. Considerations, birds quickly habituate to visual deterrents just as they can to audible ones. Again, the aesthetics generally aren't great, and they can be less effective at night because, of course, if you can't see them. Now, birds are also less active at night. That trade-off may be okay in certain circumstances, but there are some limitations there. Lasers can be a highly effective with appropriate sensoring technologies. I think the considerations with lasers is first, you have to have line of sight to the bird activity or where the birds are coming from because they won't be scared off by a laser beam that they can't see. It can be expensive to install and maintain on a relative scale compared to some of the other technologies. And safety is a serious concern with lasers where people will be present. They can do damage to retinas, to eyesight, and as a result, in some installations, there may need to be fail-safes or ways to disable the lasers before people can go near the site. Not insurmountable, but certainly another layer of thing to consider as you look at that technology. And finally, methylantranolate. This is our botanical solution that comes from a Concord, the extract from Concord grape skins. So this is the active ingredient. And kind of where did this develop? Well, Firstly, I'll get into the biology of birds and why this has an effect on birds. But this is essentially a fluid that can be sprayed, it can be fogged, or it can be dispensed in a dry vapor. But it's highly versatile and highly effective across a wide range of bird species. It's safe for use around humans. It's FDA approved and GRAS, which means generally regarded as safe. The active ingredient, methylphenolate, is actually in the food supply. But considerations, it's not applicable for residential bird work typically, at least at a large scale. These systems are a little more expensive to install, and probably not for getting rid of that one noisy crow outside your window. Wind patterns can affect placement because you're putting a vapor into the air. It's going to move where the air moves. And there's some education and awareness that's necessary when you use this technology around the general public because there will be a slight grape scent in the air that people will detect. And if they have questions, you want to be prepared to answer those questions. So how does it work? It has an effect on a specific part of a bird's anatomy called the trigeminal nerve. It creates a chemosensory irritating like pepper spray effect that's temporary for the birds. It's non-toxic. It doesn't harm the birds, but it certainly gives them a response that makes them want to find a different location. It works best when birds are in flight and when they're breathing in the material so that it'll come into contact with that trigeminal nerve. It's been thoroughly studied, peer-reviewed, registered with the EPA as a bird repellent for decades. It's been used in agriculture since the 1950s. So I want to summarize these different technologies briefly, and then I'm going to turn it over to Tom, who's going to talk a little bit more about a practical application with PG&E of the bird buffer system and methylphenolate. So you can see again that from an efficacy perspective, I think there's varying probably viewpoints on this, and it is always going to be dependent on the specific application. But exclusion and botanical or MA technologies are generally the most highly effective solutions. Lasers can be as well if deployed in the right location. I think audible and visual deterrents, because of the fact that birds can acclimate to them or become used to the deterrent and realize that it doesn't cause any real harm, makes them some less so effective in many applications. In terms of being safe for birds, I think visual and audible deterrents again are safe. They really don't cause any harm. They just try to scare the bird. The botanicals also are perfectly safe. They're just going to create that temporary effect of pepper spray, and the birds are going to leave the area. In terms of the impact to humans, as I said, the botanical is quite safe. It's found in the food supply. If you have anything that's grape flavored or grape scented, you have ingested methylphenolate. Some of the other technologies have more concerns, like I spoke about with lasers. Ease of use, the visual deterrents, I would argue, are probably the easiest to deploy because generally they don't require electronics or any power. They're inexpensive to deploy. They just might not work for very long. But the other technologies are relatively easy as well. And then from an ROI perspective, I think what we've found and what we'll talk about with the case study for utilities in particular and for PG&E, the botanical solutions can deliver a significant return on investment. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Tom, and let him continue on with our presentation. Tom.
Thank you, Jason. Can you hear me okay?
You bet, loud and clear.
Okay, good. Thank you. Well, thank you everybody for joining us. This is really exciting to go through these test studies. It's really interesting to me to find out what the results are and to be able to share them with you today. I'm really excited about this. But MA has been a staple in agriculture for bird control for decades, as Jason alluded to. So it's food safe, plant-based. Spray format typically is what's used in agriculture, so it's in a droplet form. As you can see the tractor there, they typically have big, large buckets on the back of them dispersing the methyl and threonate in droplet form. But there's a little machine down there on the very bottom, and that machine right there is a technology through bird buffer that dispenses the methyl and threonate. Just as it was applied to agriculture, it is now being deployed in a dry vapor form, which should get us the same, and has gotten us the same efficacy that we have in the large droplet form in agriculture. So next page, Jason. PG&E, I want to talk about the case study with PG&E. This was really exciting. They did a better case study than I could have ever done to talk about how different things are working, what if they're good, if they're not so good. They've isolated an area, but what they've done is they've taken a large area, which PG&E is a large area, provides natural gas and electric service to 16 million people throughout 70 square miles of service. And there's numerous substations, of course, within that area from Eureka to north to Bakersfield and south. So the large area that PG&E covers is a really substantial company to run this case study. So I'm happy to share that. Next slide, please, Jason. So at one PG&E site, the annual cost of bird-related cleanup, maintenance, and repairs was approximately $300,000. Now, that didn't include loss of productivity from workers' compensation and disability claims or bird-related illness. The thing to point out here is the annual cost for bird-related cleanup, maintenance, and repairs. And what this means is, the bird droppings and the maintenance of pulling nests down while on the substation site was taken into consideration. And then, of course, the most expensive, which is the repair of any damage that birds may have caused while on a substation site. So very interesting there. Next slide. So the solutions tried here, ultimately temporary or useless tactics, right? So we talked about ultrasonic deterrence, scare cannons, air horns, and decoys. Jason, you went through some of these in detail, which I find interesting in what those findings were. But each one of these, quite frankly, are suitable in different situations. As you said, Jason, there's not one silver bullet. It all comes down to the application. What area are you trying to deter birds from within a space? And I believe that any one of these will be effective in the right manner. But as opposed to like the decoys, air horns, scare cannons, these are moments in time, snapshots of a disbursement of a noise, which will make birds disperse, and then of course they'll come right back. Excuse me. Next slide, please.
Yeah, and I think, Tom, the in the case study, which people can download from our website as well, they'll find that these were actual tactics that PG&E had deployed to try and solve this bird problem, but to no avail.
Right, it's interesting to be in bird work and to find out, from PG&E, this large organization. It's just interesting to find out the study that they've conducted and to get the results of that. I find this very valuable. So they put MA to the test, they meaning PG&E. So to determine how methyl and threonate performed on a 500 kilovolt substation equipment, they tested it on capacitors and insulators, controlled environment using two different delivery systems. One blower with a misting element, and to a handheld thermal fogger. So the blower with the misting element, that's a dry vapor solution that comes out of say a bird buffer machine. The handheld thermal fogger we're all familiar with. That is the handheld thermal fogger that deploys a thick fog into the space with high doses of methylphenolate to pre-treat the area. Both were used to apply MA to capacitor banks and high voltage insulators during dry and wet conditions. So that's very interesting that they did it in dry and wet conditions as opposed to just one or the other. The results are electrical and chemical tests demonstrated that multiple applications did not jeopardize equipment. Direct spraying did not cause arcing or flashover. So this comes up a lot in substations. Does the vapor, when it's airborne or any other measure, does it arc? Is it flammable? Is it conductive? Does it leave a residue on anything? So those are all safety questions which are absolutely relevant. It's also relevant to point out that not only is it safe to utilize around utility substations, it's effective against bird control. So the Mr. Fogging had minimal impacts on the corona present at the 115 kilovolt post insulator. So that's important to point out. Minimal impacts on the corona that's present. That's quite valuable information. Of course, no arcing or flashover on the equipment from the application, from the mist or the fog. Excuse me. No arcing or flashover was observed. And leakage current from the equipment applicator handle to ground was insignificant. No significant residue remained on the equipment, and contamination levels were clean based on that finding. Thank you, Jason. First field test installation. This is interesting. Table Mountain Substation near Oroville, California. 500 kilovolt substation. It's in a rural setting, as you can see in that picture right there. Preferred fall and winter roosts for a large number of birds. Ideal bird roost site because of surrounding grasslands and agricultural fields. So this was specifically sought out by PG&E for this particular case study. They deployed 2 bird buffer machines, were placed at Table Mountain Substation for 3 months to run to determine efficacy, which is standard. The efficacy is a 90-day run. As Jason pointed out, birds are fairly intelligent, and we need to train them to leave the area. So the bird buffer installations. Bird buffer machines create an invisible dry vapor that is dispersed across a large area. Now, when the machine disperses the dry vapor, you might see a little bit of a white substance, kind of a cloudish, in the very beginning of the nozzle, but you can barely see it, and it's invisible. So the machines are quiet. They can be programmed to operate automatically. There's a timer on the machine that will allow you to either throttle up, throttle down, time of day, disbursement applications with that timer, which makes it valuable in any application. So the maintenance is once per month. It takes about 10 to 15 minutes to perform maintenance on the machine. Once you're there, you need to put the fluid in the machine because it's going to go through fluid, and always change the filters out so you can keep the machine breathing appropriately so it's at its maximum output. It uses 1 gallon of methylphenolate per month. Now, the 1 gallon, if I could touch on that for 1 second, that 1 gallon, I just want to make sure that we understand that very small amounts of methylphenolate, the active ingredient, is in 1 gallon of the fluid. Everything else in that gallon, outside of that very small methylphenolate, it seems overpowering methylphenolate, but it's in the food that we eat, and it's a very small amount within that gallon. Everything else in that gallon is safe, along with the methylphenolate that's in our food system. Sorry, Jason, I just wanted to point that out. I thought that was an important point. Next slide, please. Prior to the initial application, I don't know if anybody's experienced 50 to 70,000 birds roosting at one time, but I think we all agree that this is pretty significant bird pressure. After 1 month, we had there's a Table Mountain employee that was reporting on the efficacy of the methylphenolate, and specifically he says, Bill, the pigeon is still hanging around with Betty, the pigeon mate, at the top of the tower, but they keep moving further away. I can smell a light hint of grape almost a half a mile away. It's really working. That's interesting. You can smell it up to a half mile away, and this was out in that rural area. It looks like the wind was could be moving across those trees fairly quickly. After 3 months, there isn't a bird within a mile of the location, and the birds did not return. I think that's a testament to training the birds. As we know, birds come and go. They will get used to certain applications, where it be a visual aid, a visual deterrent. This methylenthranolate solution, when they inhale it, they will not acclimate to it. And I believe that that's a very important case study to report on. The final outcome, major savings in labor, repairs, and of course fluid, absence of avian-borne disease, increased morale and productivity. I've talked to several technicians that are on the ground inside of these substations, and they really get tired of working around bird droppings, cleaning nests out of covers, and so on. So when they don't have to do that, and of course without putting their boots on late at night to go get a substation back up and running, it's very positive. Annual cleaning cost reduced down to zero. It's a threefold ROI after 6 months. 15-minute labor of 1 gallon of MA fluid every month or two. 6 visits a year, 1.5 hours of labor, 6 hours of fluid, and 6 filters. It's very, very, very simple. Next slide. Safety is really big on this, by the way. Safety, safety, safety. So commercial avian control, it just works. Now, in utilities, aviation, food processing, warehouses, utilities is first in this slide, because this is really the sweet spot for methylenthranolate. You don't have a lot of people walking around in these utilities. And Jason, you mentioned earlier on a previous slide that you have a popular opinion when this methylenthranolate is deployed in a public setting. Then you have to answer to it. People want to know what they're inhaling, and that's fair. And an appropriate response is fair. But the utility specifically is typically not manned very often. We have technicians that come in and out of there. The utility companies do, however. And it's a perfect environment, really, to have the biggest impact. But bird buffer is leader in safe, effective, and humane commercial pest control that divert birds in open spaces by automatically emitting an invisible plant-based vapor. Popular application, like I said, utilities, that's really around high infrastructure areas. That's typically where this solution is deployed. There are other methods in smaller deployment methods of methylenthranolate that are more for residential, very small areas. But for bird buffer, we are high value infrastructure bird protection. That's what we do. We protect the birds, we protect the site, and the methylenthranolate doesn't hurt the bird. I want to point out that it's so important that it's a pepper spray sensation. The bird feels the irritant of the methylenthranolate, leaves the area, the sensation dissipates. So it takes a little bit of time to teach the bird, but it definitely works. Next slide. So 90 days, 90% reduction in birds and mess. Well, safety, safety. If you're reducing your bird pressure by 90%, that's a pretty large claim. There's a hand-in-hand solution here. And what I mean by that is, yes, the solution works, but it has to work with the cleaning of the site. So removing birds, removing the bird nests, things of that nature, that certainly helps. Those that know that when birds overhead are flying by, or the bird scouts come out, they see sticks, twigs, feathers, bird droppings, what have you. And what that does is that tells other birds that that's a safe environment. So they start coming in from other areas because they have the signals that that's a safe, warm, protected environment. But what we do is the first 90 days, we do bi-weekly check-ins to monitor the reduction. So we highly encourage a pre-treatment with the TF11, which is the thermal fogger we just talked about. And we want to stay engaged. And by engaged, we want to say, okay, well, every other week, we'd like to talk to somebody that knows what's going on at that site so we could walk through it with you to ensure that we are getting the biggest impact for the deployment of these machines. Next slide. So the customized implementation plan and guidance. So we review your facility with you, typically on a Teams call. Sometimes we do that in person. And we give you recommendations of precise machine placement. And it takes about less than half a day to deploy. So there's a little screenshot coming up. This is the one I'm looking for. Thank you. Here's an example. So you have the address on the top left and then the product right below that with two Q4s. Q4s are our larger machines, and you'll see a rendering of a substation to the right. Now these little blue bubbles represent placement of the machine, and then of course the subsequent direction or visual representation of the direction of travel of the vapor because it comes out in a cone shape. So this is a typical rendering that we do every single day. Below that is the wind history. The wind history gives you, because wind plays a big part of this. Again, everything, there's no silver bullet for anything. Even this has its own challenges. So we need to make sure that we are getting as technical as possible around wind direction, speed, how often, what time of year, So we include a hyperlink at the very bottom where it says click to see your personalized wind history. When you click that, you'll be able to click a play button, and it will tell you what time of year the wind is, where's the wind blowing from, how hard is it blowing, and it really gives you a good feel for placement of the machines. As the year moves along, if the wind direction changes, and you'll want to move these machines around in some cases. They are portable, which makes them a good solution. They're not anchored in one position. Next slide. Again, easy maintenance. 2 filters of 1 gallon of fluid a month. You have to have access to it and plug it into 120 volt. Pretty simple. So you plug the machine in 120 volt. It's a 5-minute monthly maintenance. It's on an automated schedule that you set with a timer, and then we drop ship to a specified location at the appropriate intervals. Typically, that's every quarter. So fairly simple to maintain. Next slide, Jason. So we ultimately safeguard your substations, employees, and customers from the repercussions, costs, and inconveniences of bird-related incidents. That's basically all I have. Excuse me for my voice cracking. I've been talking for the last several hours there, Jason. So forgive me, everyone. But that next slide, please. I think that about does it. So we want to shrink bird pressure, where it be bird buffer, where it be lasers, where it be no matter the product. We want to have the solution, and we're constantly in a mode of learning, so which is important for us, because we know that at bird buffer in particular is not a silver bullet, and the case study that PG&E ran also says that there isn't a silver bullet, but what we're looking for is what's the best case scenario related to the energy sector, specifically substations. What does that look like? And we want to look at all applications and find out what's the best efficacy we can get with whatever product, where it be a standalone product or a companion product. We're out there trying to figure this out. So with that, I thank you for your time. And Jason or Jessica, I will pass back to you.
Great. Thanks, Tom. Yeah, Jessica, we'll turn it back over to you and see if we have any questions.
Yeah, now's a great time. If you have any questions that we haven't been able to get to today, that you can go ahead and pop them over in the chat, and we'll answer those live for you. Give you just a second to see if anything pops in here. I don't see anything coming in from our side, so that's good news. But that being said, if you find you have any other questions following this event, please don't hesitate to reach out to us via the website, birdbuffer.com, the email on your screen, the phone number. We'd be happy to talk to you about your specific application and figure out what would be the right solution for you. And this is, as I said, this event's being recorded, so it will be coming your way shortly for reviewing again or sharing with others. And it's been a pleasure. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.